Hello, my name is Dennis Galvin. I want to welcome you to another edition of Ready, Set, Talk. I think you're going to find this program very, very interesting. We're shooting this just before Christmas, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the aftermath of the election of 2018. Before we begin, I'd like to say, just to kind of set the context for this discussion, we're told that we live in a time of political correctness. But there was a time, and I remember it very well, when there was no such thing. Back, say, 30 years ago, if you went to the Westford town meeting, you would find it a fairly raucous affair. You might find people standing up and pointing at each other. And in some cases, they might even raise their voices. And back in those days, you could go into a coffee shop, and it was not uncommon to hear people talking about politics, sometime 2, 3, 4. And the interesting thing about it is you could actually join the conversation yourself, and people would listen. Sometimes people got heated, sometimes they left. But they always stayed friends, and they never tried to hurt one another. The worst thing that could happen to you back in those days was somebody would get up and threaten to pull papers, which meant that they were going to go out and they were going to run for office to spite you. And that's changed. We now live in a time when that culture of democracy, I believe, is somewhat eroding. The face-to-face dialogue that we used to see is now being replaced by a sanitized, antiseptic situation in which people use online chat rooms and they post their ideas, basically in isolation. There's no two-way communications. And in some cases, these chat rooms can get very nasty. They can smear people, or they can insult people that don't believe or follow the ideas that they particularly do. This has led, in my judgment, to a sort of a coarseness and a crassness that has interjected itself into American political life, and a little bit of cowardice as well. And as a result, a lot of our voters are more ignorant of the issues, and they certainly are ignorant of the people who have come forward to try to offer themselves to either represent them or to lead them. Today, we are very fortunate. We have two individuals that I wanted to bring on the program with you to talk about their experiences of actually participating on baseline, frontline politics in your community. The two people are, to my left, are Kathleen Lynch, who ran as a Republican for state representative, and to my right is John McDonald, who ran as a Republican candidate for state senator. Now, they bring a unique experience to this because they ran in opposition to the status quo in Massachusetts. And they're going to share some of their experiences with you as to what it's like to actually buck the system a little bit. So I'm going to start with Kathy, and I'm going to ask you just very briefly, can you just give us a little background about yourself, very, very brief?
Okay. I come from a career in advertising design, marketing, presentations, publications, and how brief do you want this? So I've done a lot.
Life?
Okay, family life. I have 2 children. I come from a family of 5. I'm very involved with the community in leadership positions, a very big volunteer, take family very important, and I'm involved with my church as well. So that's a little bit about me.
How about you, John?
Well, I'm a veteran. I'm a businessman. I'm a dad of 2 beautiful teenage girls. And I've been a businessman for a long time in the community, done a lot of stuff in the world of veterans advocacy, and been very, very involved in my local community, which is the city of Lowell.
So let me start with you.
Sure.
What made you decide to throw your hat into the political ring?
Well, it was really, I think the biggest thing for me was my passion around veterans issues, and the fact that I felt that we weren't being properly represented by the people that were currently in the position I was seeking. We've had a lot of issues in the state where our political leaders gave themselves a pay raise. They ignore the will of the people. And I felt it was time that we had somebody with a differing point of view and somebody who wanted to get actively involved, share their point of view, and to give people an opportunity and a choice from what they had had before.
Okay, Kathy, how about you? What made you decide to upset your entire life and go into this and take a shot at running for office?
Well, you know, I have a family. I'm concerned about the political situation in our country. I want to see freedom for everybody. I don't want us to slide into a tyranny. I want freedom. I want prosperity. I want good health. I want good education. All the things that I think most people want. And I want to maintain that and keep that freedom.
Compelled you to go into this and take this risk?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, have you always had an interest in politics, or is this something that developed as a result of the campaign, or?
I am not a career politician. I had no aspirations. This really just came up as a citizen who is involved in the community, and I thought to myself that we needed to have good representation for the working class person, the person that's out there just trying to have a good living. And I didn't want to see this kind of representation by someone who's been in politics and will always stay in politics and will forget what it's like to be the common person.
Did you ever run for any office before?
Never have.
Okay. How did you, John? What was, did you always have a maintain an interest? I know that you ran a very popular radio show up in Lowell. I mean, did you have was there a long-standing interest in politics?
Yeah, I've always been interested in politics to a certain extent. I think that growing up in the Reagan era, Reagan was the president, I guess, in my formative years, and so I had an interest, at least from of how the country was being run and what it was being run. But I think that what propelled me into politics directly, and I think this is the case for a lot of people. I think a lot of people are interested in politics in general. But until it affects you personally, that's when I start to see people truly get involved and start to position themselves as a potential candidate. Never really had a long-standing desire to be a politician as much as I had a desire to be an agent of change, to change things the way they were. I never looked at politics as a career as much as I looked at it as an opportunity to change the status quo. And what I mean by that is to improve people's lives, to put place what I felt was important, which is that when it comes to politics, I think the idea is that politicians are to serve the people, not serve themselves. And I think that our environment today is that we see an awful lot of people that are in politics where their first mode of importance is serving themselves.
How about you? Did you ever run for office before?
I'd ran for city council in Lowell at one point, but I had been involved with various political campaigns, some successful, but being a Republican in Massachusetts, I think one of the things we had to get used to was that we experienced quite a few losses.
So let me ask you this, Kathy. Before you made the decision, how much thought did you put into it, and how much did you talk to anybody about it before you went in?
Well, surprisingly, I had not decided to run for anything a year prior to this campaign. And I became the Republican Town Committee chair in Westford. We were looking at who was running for what, and our current legislator didn't have any opponent. And we're thinking, who can do this? I mean, can we get someone up to run against this legislator? And I had no idea that I would even want to do such a thing. And I said, so where do you think I am? I asked one of the respected Republicans, where do you think I am in the political spectrum? And this person came back to me and said, you can run now. I said, what, now? And he said, yeah, go ahead. So I decided very last minute, I mean, 2 weeks before those signatures were due, I collected with some friends some signatures. So you see, there was no kind of forethought to this, but just a willingness to get into the race and try to make some improvements.
Oh, very good. How about you, John? Did you go into this as quickly, or did you have a little bit more of an extended period before you decided to go in?
No, I got into the race a year before it started.
Okay.
I think on a state Senate level, having 6 different communities and a very large area to cover, I think that was the way. But how I got recruited into it, I was actually considering another bid for city council at the time. And during that time, I had been on Fox News and Friends nationally, again, in the role of more of a veterans advocate, commenting on different things that were happening nationwide. And as a result of that, I had several lunches with some some people that were in the political world and had said, "What do you think about state senate?" And once I started talking about what I thought about the state senate and the current conditions down at Beacon Hill, they said, "I think you're our guy." So I too believe that people need opposition. Incumbent politicians need opposition because they need to hear from the people what is actually going on. And sometimes that opposition is successful, and other times not so much.
So let me ask you this question. Now, you obviously were aware of what goes on in a campaign, but then you jumped into it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask the both of you: what was the difference between what you thought the campaign was going to be like and what it actually became?
Right.
And why don't I start with you on that one?
Well, see, I'm not a half-in type of guy at all. I'm all in or I'm not in at all. And I knew it would be a lot of work because of the campaign I had run prior. I just, knowing myself and the type of candidacy and candidate I would want to be, and that's just the person that I am, it was 100%. And so with that said, there were some certain parts of the campaign which that didn't appeal to me, going out and collecting signatures and doing things like that. I always felt like I wanted to get to the next stage.
Can you explain what collecting signatures means?
Yeah, when you want it, you can declare yourself as a candidate. I could technically declare myself as a candidate today, but there's a certain process of which you go through, certain timelines of which you have to pull papers from the
Just
state,
like we talked
right?
about.
Yeah, you pull papers and you have to collect signatures from people that are unenrolled or Republican if you decide that you're going to declare yourself as a Republican candidate. You go out to people in the community and you get their signature, which you get, for me it was 200 signatures, certified signatures. So you have to get a signature, person's address. You take your signatures to the town, each individual town that you get the signatures in, and they have to verify that person's signature. Once that qualifies, you take your papers to the State House. They certify you as an official candidate.
Okay. How about you, Kathy? Was there a difference between how you envisioned a campaign was going to run, and then when you get into it, you actually found out what it was like? How did you see that difference?
Well, growing up in our culture, I'd see someone running for office and I'd see bumper stickers and signs, and maybe they'd have a speech that they were doing, but that's pretty much what I saw. Then when I start looking into what's involved with the campaign, I said, it's more than that. It's more than just the signs and the bumper stickers. It's getting out and it's knocking on doors, which I didn't even know that really was an important part. And I learned it through the process. I mean, I'm a quick study. I learned things very quickly. But I learned that was really important. Fundraising is so important, and that's not my favorite activity, like asking people for money. Yeah. And that was probably going to be one of the hardest things that I had to do, was try to get money. So those are a couple of things that were involved. But the campaign and mail and all the other things, I mean, we can go into more of that maybe later, but there was a lot more to it.
So a lot of organization involved.
Yeah, I had no idea all the things that were involved.
That's funny. How would you describe the key element of your approach? What were the fundamental activities that you were going to engage in to try to make your case?
Well, one of my issues was that I didn't have as much name recognition as my opponent. He'd been here most of his life, and I hadn't. I was here for 4 years. I was in Massachusetts for 15, but only in Westford for 4 years. So I knew that name recognition was going to be really important. And how would I do that? I had to meet the people. So I had to get out and do the door knocks, and I had to get an aggressive mail campaign so people could go, who is that? Oh, I see. Fortunately, I was involved in a number of community activities, and I have children, so I already knew quite a few people, but not as many as my opponent. And I still think that was a factor in my loss, is that people didn't know me, and they're going to vote for someone they know and they're familiar with.
So let me ask you, how many doors did you knock on?
Almost 6,000.
6,000.
And then I had other people walking, knocking on doors too.
How many pairs of shoes did you wear out?
Oh, that's a good question. 1, 2, I'd say 3 pairs of shoes.
How about you, John? What was the focus that you brought to this?
Two primary things. It was both an old school approach and a new school. New school meaning that we got very, very involved with social media, Facebook, Twitter. We did a lot of stuff like community television. We produced commercials. We did a lot of stuff on YouTube. But that didn't overtake what I felt were the critical underpinnings of a campaign that needed to be done, which was knocking on doors. We knocked on over 30,000 doors in over a year. And it was a very, very aggressive campaign. We spent a lot of time out there talking with people. We went to town committee meetings. We went to Chamber of Commerce meetings. We did all the things I think that were required of a candidate, a good candidate, to get their name out there and to show people your work ethic. I think that was the one thing that we wanted to show people, is that regardless of the results, no one was going to outwork our campaign, and we did do that, and I'm very proud of that.
So how about the issues part? I mean, did you feel as though you had a good grasp of the issues, or as you got into it, did you find you had more and more that you had to learn?
I felt we had a good grasp of the issues right out of the gate, and I think our objective, though, was to communicate a message that we thought would bring more people on our side. Some of the critical things that we're facing Massachusetts, whether it be immigration or it be spending, taxes, and I think the one part that was missing with our campaign that we underestimated, and again, it was to Kathy's point, on the fundraising level, I felt, and we did, dollar to dollar equal what our opponent raised. But I think what was required in order for a Republican who is it's an uphill battle, was to raise a lot more and to really get into the point where we could have afforded to spend some serious money on TV advertising because the district's so big.
Kathy, how about you? How did you find trying to grapple with the issues and understand the issues that were affecting the district in Massachusetts? What was that process like for you?
It was a good amount of work to just get up and running on the issues that I wasn't aware of. So it was a lot of work. I mean, I had to read some stuff, and it wasn't even enjoyable reading. Right, looking at the issues, but it was an important thing, and I had support with that, and I felt like I really learned a lot. And speaking to the people as well, hearing what's important to them is really important. So, so I came out really, really sharp about the issues. I was really pleased with what I learned through the process.
Good. You had. Let me ask you this in that same vein. What did you learn about state government that you didn't really know before? If there's anything that you could point to, is there something?
Well, what gets me is that our legislators, they don't even get a chance to see some of these bills before it's time to vote for them. I was shocked to hear about that. And sometimes they get 24 hours. I mean, they need at least 48 hours to look at these bills and understand them, because you know how long some of these bills are, some of the background that's needed for it. So, so I was shocked to know that. And I also, to see how unbalanced it was, it really is a Democratic legislature. We're talking 160 legislators and a little over 30 Republicans. The rest are Democrats, just a couple of unenrolled, I think. And that's very slanted. So if you take a look at the problems in Massachusetts, where does the blame go? It's got to be the Democrats, because the Republicans don't have much of a voice. They do what they can in there, but it's really, so it was very surprising for me to see that dynamic.
How about you, John? I mean, when you look back at that, what was it that surprised you about state government that you didn't know before you get into this?
I underestimated the Democratic machine. I didn't realize to the depths and levels of which the machine permeated itself, whether it be local or even regional politics. And the connections that people have really opened my eyes from that perspective. And I think that the other part of it was the name recognition and who I ran against. I ran against a very popular name, maybe not well-known person.
Yeah, Kennedy.
But Kennedy, yeah. I mean, how do you run against the Kennedy name? Because even as sophisticated as we were and the phone calls that we made, it would often crop up, well, I have to vote for a Kennedy. They've done so much for the state. And people, when they realized that this person wasn't even related to the Kennedys, although he did nothing to change that idea, you know, it helped them.
All fair, love, and war.
Yeah,
right?
all fair and love and war is exactly right. But the machine is pretty deep, and it travels in circles that most people wouldn't even be aware of. And it's an entrenched system that, in a lot of ways, is designed now to support the Democratic Party in Massachusetts, and that's why it's so difficult, I think, for Republicans to overcome that.
So what did you learn about your district? Was there anything that struck you about the district that you didn't know before you started this?
What I didn't know and what I get the most enjoyment out of was, I'm a people person, I enjoy it, but to learn about the very localized issues, like for instance here in Westford, and asphalt plants and different things that were really truly affecting people's everyday life. And when you get an education on that, you realize, albeit that sometimes the localized issue isn't something that you're necessarily going to be able to affect in your position that you're running for, but you realize that people still want you to have a voice, and they want you to express where you stand. And I think that was interesting, and I enjoyed learning a lot about the local issues. For instance, in Pepperell, a local issue had bubbled up where it was a landfill, and they were putting toxic dirt. And so all of a sudden you find yourself embroiled, and where do you stand? And I found that interesting, but I enjoyed it very much.
How about you, Kathy? Was there anything about the district that you learned that surprised you, or that you stayed with it? Just about the folks and the communities and everything else that you had to deal with.
I think just looking at the education system and seeing how much money Chelmsford and Littleton and Westford get as for local aid, I was pretty shocked to see it right in numbers that Westford was winning out on that, and Littleton was second, and then Chelmsford was third in how much local aid they were getting. I think it's a complicated formula, so a lot of us don't know what goes into that formula.
Best kept secret.
But and that's unfortunate that it's so secret. But I do.
We're talking about the Chapter 70
funding. But I did see that it looked inequitable across the towns, and I think that people in those towns are somewhat. Some of them are aware of that.
Okay. So now let's go back as far as. You've put your campaign out there, you've got your issues, you're out there working, knocking on those doors, wearing out those shoes, okay? What did you get for support and resources from any organizations that helped you, albeit the Republican Party or anything like that? How were you, what kind of resources or help did you get, if anything?
There's certain little groups of people that get together and form coalitions and so forth. And they would come forward and say, we really believe in what you're doing and that kind of thing. So I had volunteers that I met through the Republican Party as well, and they would just offer to drive, and I was just so fortunate to have the driving going on, so I wasn't just alone. Some people even helped door knock. So yeah, I got some support from various groups of people and organizations that said, Kathy, we'd like to see you be successful, and here's some help,
Mm-hmm. Okay, how about you, John?
I enjoyed the support of a lot of different, as Kathy put it, different coalitions or groups that were somewhat organized at a state level. So that was good. But as far as the Massachusetts GOP, which you naturally would think would gravitate towards all Republican candidates, and it really is, I think, an eye-opener from a standpoint of the way it operates now is based off of name recognition. And you have a certain period of time of which the Mass GOP decides that they're going to hold a poll, conduct what they feel is your chances to be a legitimate candidate, and they poll your chances against a prospective opponent. It's really a dollars and cents game at the state level, and to me, in hindsight, although I enjoyed the support, and I'm not critical of what we got from the Mass GOP level, I do think it, in many respects, puts candidates behind the eight ball in anticipation of what they may or may not get from the state party.
Really?
I do. I think it puts a lot of candidacies behind the eight ball relative to name recognition and financial support.
Okay. Okay. So now let's go on a more personal level. Okay. How did this impact you time-wise in the course of your? How long did the campaign run? How much of a time commitment was there, and how much did it affect your own family? How did you how did you balance your normal life situations and commitments with this one? And we'll start with you.
Okay, so we're talking around 6 months' time, starting June.
Yep.
June, July, August, September, October, November, 6 months. And I spoke to my family. I spoke to my husband and my 2 children. And I said, look, there's a campaign. I'm thinking of running. I know this is going to take more time than you're accustomed to seeing me away on various meetings and so forth. How are you with that? And I said, because if you're not on board with this, I'm not going to run, because that's how much I value my family. And so I asked my children one at a time and my husband, and they said that they were up for it. So I said, I won't be around as much, and you're going to have to kind of get some rides from other people, ask friends and families and my husband and so forth. They're going to have to kick in a little bit. So what it involved was me pretty much 24/7 with a few rides mixed in, because they couldn't always get a ride. But
You got to do what you got to do.
Right? Family first, right? But other than a few little things, I was basically out campaigning 24/7 minus sleep. And sometimes it wasn't enough sleep.
Well, let me ask you this. How did the family react, your kids particularly, when you started to hit the press, comments were made about you, things like that? Did that affect them at all?
I'm very lucky, very fortunate that there wasn't any real big blowback. I appreciate that this campaign did not get real nasty. Yeah, sure, I had a mailer that pointed out some differences, but they were truthful. There was good information. It was backed up by roll calls. But other than that, it was a pretty good campaign, and there wasn't a lot of mudslinging,
No?
that you see more at the higher levels.
Yeah.
So my kids didn't suffer consequences of much, and nor did my husband.
How about you? How about you, John?
Well, I worked full time, but the second I punched the clock to get out, we were out every single night from, again, a lot of it was summer and hours and whatnot, but we spent at least 4 hours every night out and about, not the countless hours you spend on social media doing different things, and every weekend. So it was a 7-day-a-week process for all over a year, and my family, my kids were very, very good about it. I put them first. Anything that come up, I dropped, whatever, and yeah, you have to. You have to do that. Yeah, because they are sacrificing so much during the process that when something does come up, you gotta make sure that they're a priority. Sure. And so that was important. And my campaign, we ran a very aggressive campaign. We nailed. I had several different opponents at the time. I had somebody who dropped out, and then I had somebody. Eventually, I had an opponent that we ended up with. But we nailed them on their records. We made sure that people knew what was going on. But we did, in the general election, take on a fair amount of, we'll say, we experienced some flack.
Some flack. Well, the old saying is, if you're not taking flack,
yeah.
you're not over the target, right?
And I would say that I enjoyed the experience of actually being targeted by the Democratic State Committee and some absolutely false information that went out. It couldn't be any further from the truth. But, I figured we arrived. Yeah. We arrived politically if we were getting nailed like that.
Hammed.
Yeah.
How was the physical impact on you? How physically wearing is the campaign?
It is very physically demanding. I think anybody who gets into a race like this has to have an expectation that they have to be somewhat physically fit. I really do, because if you're going to run a campaign like I did, which is knocking on doors every single night. We knocked on doors, even in the pouring rain sometimes we knocked on doors just to prove that we were dedicated to what we were doing. I dropped a lot of weight. I ran through at least 4 pairs of shoes. And, for me, it was, it actually benefited my health, believe it or not, because of the physical activity.
I had a physician told me that too.
Yeah.
How about you? You must have wasted away to almost nothing.
Yeah, I lost a few pounds for sure, but I put them back. I don't like to carry a lot of weight, but I did lose some weight. I'm like, and I did not get as much sleep as I wanted.
Yeah.
So that happened.
Wound up and everything.
That
right?
happened, yeah. But again, walking is a good thing for people.
Yeah.
And so it's not a bad thing to be out there walking.
That's interesting. So take it from this point now that you've got us out there. How did you? And I'm talking about in general. How did you get received on the campaign trail? You made a lot of contacts with people. You were at a lot of public events. By and large, how would you describe your reception? How did people treat you when you offered yourself?
It's a very interesting process. I think that the listeners would be interested to hear that when I knocked on a door, I had no idea what I was going to come up against. I didn't know where these people stood politically. I didn't know if they were right, left, center. I didn't know if I was going to get the husband or the wife or the child or what. So it was
the dog.
Or the dog. But it was it's an uncomfortable thing. It's uncomfortable when it's a cold call.
Yeah.
And
it's
what it is, a physical cold call. So I tried to be just kind of general, throw out a couple of things that I stood for, and see what came back, right? See what was important to them. I tried to find out what was important to them. And for the most part, you asked for overall how it went. People were very good. They were receptive. A lot of them didn't, like if I said, so what's important to you? A lot of them just said, I haven't really thought about that. And they felt on the spot. Yeah. They hadn't even been thinking about politics, right? So that was interesting. But I would say that our district I'm happy with this district. Polite, they're good people. Yeah. And they don't get into this kind of national political nasty divide that we're seeing now, for the most part. So I was very pleased with that. And sometimes I would put something out there, and they would ask me a question, for example, and I would tell them where I stand, and then they were done talking with me.
Did you feel as
because
though
they didn't agree?
Did you feel as though you got better at this? Did you feel that you were able to communicate better at the more you did this?
Oh, sure. At first it's a little bit rough and a little bit more uncomfortable and so forth. So as time goes, but it's never completely comfortable.
Yeah.
Unless I find someone who I agree with and they agree with me and they don't tell me to say goodbye. They don't say bye. We're done with you. No, they're just like, yeah, let's talk about this or that. And educating people as to the issues and where our legislator stands and so forth. A lot of people just don't know what's going on and how our legislator is voting. And so it's really important for us to get that word out and let people know, and to have more roll calls so that we all know where our legislator is voting. Because if they're representing us, we need to know what they're voting on. And right now, a lot of people don't know. I found when I was out there that they would choose who they're going to vote for based upon if their kid knew that person or if they grew up with that person. We need to start looking at what's going on and what's an important issue. We need to look at how our legislator is voting, because that's going to impact our government and where we go as a state.
How about you? How was your reception as you went out into the public to offer yourself in a leadership position?
I learned that, well, first of all, by just a majority of people are very, very interesting and nice. It's always the small percentage that stand out in your mind, though, and the experiences you had. I mean, our campaign, I was bit by a dog twice. I think one of the dogs really enjoyed it. I had a campaign manager
we
had my campaign manager got hit by a car. I mean, we had everything that could happen. But each community is really different in the district. I mean, I had Lowell, Westford, Tingsboro, Groton, Dunstable, and Pepperell. All very different, and all very different in how they receive you at the door as well. Some communities were more used to seeing people knocking on their doors, whereas a town like Groton, I was told nobody knocks on doors, but we did it anyway. I think that
cultural shock.
Yeah, so they're a little shocked. I think most of the people were pleasant we're happy to see it.
Okay.
That you respected the fact that you were knocking on their door, you were asking for their support,
Yeah.
and listening. I think the key was to be a good listener. But we experienced it all. You know, we had people throw us out of their yard. We had people slam their doors. I mean, we had it all. But again, the vast majority of people were very, very interesting. And I think, you know, one of my primary issues was talking about illegal immigration and how it was affecting the state from a financial standpoint. And what we discovered, that I discovered, is there's so many people that are here legally, legal immigrants, that spent so much time and effort, energy in becoming a legal citizen.
Money too.
That I don't think most people realize that legal citizens are the legal new naturalized citizens, people who are first generation, are really the people that are most upset about illegal immigration and the costs and how it affects the state.
So let me ask you this: at any point in time, were there any periods of time during the campaign where you actually feared something, or that you felt danger at all, any sort of way?
No. I mean, I don't get nervous. I make people nervous. You know, I don't.
Sometimes
I don't get ulcers. I give them.
Sometimes that can have a reback. How about you, Kathy? Were there any times that you, the situations that you saw you got a little nervous about, or anything like that?
Well, this always adds intrigue to a conversation, right? When you have some conflict, right?
Politics is fun. It is.
Yeah. So I was out at a supermarket with a colleague, and some guy came at me, right? He was just like in my face, pointing and mad and all this, and my colleague, who's a male, just kind of took that guy aside and kind of brought him into another conversation and protected me. So that was nice. But apparently he had a few drinks and he was violent. And this is not my first time being out there for political initiatives. I've been in different initiatives, and sometimes you see these types of conflicts out there. But you know, it wasn't anything real dangerous. It wasn't anything real problematic when you think about it.
Yeah. Just and give you. How about if you look back on your campaign experience? Do you have any fond memories? Things that you really look to say that I really liked that. That was something that really inspired me, or I felt good about it. What was the one thing, or two things? I don't care. Whatever it was, fond memories that you had out of the experience.
Well, fond memories make me smile, make me laugh, and when we were in the Chelmsford Independence Day Parade, I had collected some people to hold signs and go with me, and what I would do would be to go shake hands along the path, the parade, and that was fun. It was nice meeting people and everything, and my people holding signs would sometimes get way ahead of me while I'm talking to someone and talk, so I'd have to run up, and I had this guy from the Chelmsford Republican Town Committee saying, "This is Kathy Lynch. She's going to work this hard for you. You see how hard she works? She has all this energy, and she's going to work for you." And it just made me smile. And I'm like, "Isn't this great? The way he's backing me up,
all the people
and
there
how
and the
how
band.
vocal he is, and how extroverted. This takes an extrovert to get out there, to begin with. You have to get out. And you have to interact with the public and people you don't know and so forth. So, but I had a team behind me, and that was great."
How about you?
Well, I think for me it was the relationships that I built. I had some older friends that came along for the ride, but the new people that I met, that I would say I created a lifelong relationship with, and I know that a lifelong relationship, and that's the part that makes me smile the most. Those people that stood out and almost became part of your family. And that to me is something that wasn't necessarily expecting, but certainly is a positive byproduct of this experience.
So
can I throw in
sure,
one more
absolutely.
thing? I only put one instance, and I wanted to say that I really enjoyed being here at WestfordCAT on the Ed Cohen Variety Show.
Did you?
I have to throw that in there because
There's a plug for Ed Cohen.
That was a lot of fun, and I didn't know Ed very well, and he's a great guy. Yeah. And I one of my colleagues had to twist my arm and say, "Oh, Ed Cohen's Variety Show. That's gonna be awkward and whatever." And he had to twist my arm and say, "Go on there." And I did. And we had a lot of fun. And that's the type of thing that makes the campaign great, when you can have these fun experiences and you can meet people and find out how great they are.
Yeah.
So what would you say, looking back on, what was your most valuable resource? Then when you look back and when you did this, you say, that's the one thing I have to have again if I'm going to do this.
Well, this campaign, I was the official campaign manager for myself. So if I were to do this again, I would want an official campaign manager. You know, it was a good experience for me, though, because then I was able to learn how to well, I'm already a good organizer, but organize and delegate and so forth. I had very good consultants, though. It wasn't just me alone. And I have to appreciate that for sure. But I would want a campaign manager. And the other things that are really important are fundraising. So, you know, that's key. And then getting out, you know, to meet the people in any way you can.
Okay, how about you, John? What would you say is the most valuable resource you had or that you needed?
I think your kitchen cabinet, which is your campaign manager, your fundraiser, your communications director. I think in this day and age, you have to have somebody that is a specialist when it comes to video and social media, and to have that kind of guidance and expertise. It's just critical to helping you get your message out. So I think that to me, a campaign team that you can trust, which I had, and people who are willing to put in as much work as you are, and for the most part, I had that. I was lucky that I had a very dedicated group. So to me, those are must-haves. You can't do it alone. You know, politics is about addition and not subtraction. You got to expand your circle. And the wider you expand your circle, the more valuable and better chances you are to win. And I think that we did that for the most part. And it was, to me, just so glaringly obvious that was you have to have that. So
now we're going to go into the reality of this. Obviously, the both of you were not successful, right? And let me ask you this: were you surprised by the result?
I was from the, yes, the answer is yes, but I was surprised by the fact that, you know, we had done some polling and we were actually ahead. I think the Democrats that did polling thought that we were ahead, but I think that the end result was, which surprised, I think, both sides, was the turnout, and I think it was relative to ballot questions versus necessarily the candidate. And I think if you look across the results of Republicans across the state, we all virtually finished up with the same percentage.
Yeah, that's right.
With a few exceptions.
Which is ironic. I mean,
yeah, it is. And so to me, there's no other real way to really validate what happened other than to say that I believe it was was a ballot question on the ballot that drove a certain political point of view out that wasn't expected. But I had a good feeling that we knew what was going to happen around 8 o'clock that morning based on the turnout.
On who was showing up.
Who was showing up.
How about you, Kathy? Were you surprised at what happened? And any comments about shocked? What were your comments?
So before I ran, I met with some very important people, and I wanted to get an idea of whether I could win this or not, because I didn't want to run just to run and not have a chance. So at the beginning of the campaign, we thought I had a chance, and I worked it really hard, you know, for that chance. So, you know, up to the end, I didn't know what the result would be. I really didn't, and we saw a lot of people who just typically don't even get out to vote come out this election. And I think what they did was they attached all the Republican candidates to Trump, who had been repeatedly bashed by the Democratic Party the whole campaign season. We're in a blue state, and the tactic of the Democratic Party was to bash Trump incessantly. And so that's not local. I mean, Trump has nothing really to do with my work for this race. But yet, all the candidates were kind of lockstep attached to him, and I think that all those voters that typically don't get out, and then of course the ones that do, but the ones that don't came out and just went right down the ticket. And that's why all the candidates pretty much ended up the same numbers. Now we had our base, and let me tell you, I'm very pleased with my results. Let's see, 7,899.
That's good.
So almost 8,000 votes. That's around 36% of the electorate.
That's the most than most people ever get in their lives. So you know.
So I just wanted to say that I was surprised, but I thought I'd do better. But I think given this political environment, and there were other things at play. I mean, the fact that I wasn't as known as the incumbent. There were other things and factors at play. But I think that was a large thing, and I think it hurt us more than we thought it would.
Did you have a sense of loss that day? Was it devastating? How did you handle the news that you lost?
Oh, you know what? I was relieved it was over. I was pleased with our result right from the get-go. I was just like, we as a team worked so hard, and we did a great job. And that was my initial response. And then, that's not all that happens. Then you go through the next day and the next week and the next, and then all the feelings start coming out. The sadness, the anger, the frustration. But overall, resounding appreciation for this campaign. Pride, a lot of pride with this campaign. And no regrets. I mean, I think it was definitely worth it. And I think it was good for the people to see what the issues were, because they wouldn't have known them as well if there wasn't someone running against our current legislator. Okay. So they got to see another view.
How about you, John? Did you have a sense of loss out of this? I mean,
maybe a little different perspective. I haven't been involved with so many different campaigns and seeing both what it's like to win on a night and the euphoria you experience versus the loss. I often said to people when we had our campaign party, I said, well, if we're winning, we're going to have a large crowd. We lose, it's going to be like a morgue. And that's exactly what it was, with the exception of a few good friends. I took my role that night once we realized what the results were. I had a very young campaign team around me, so, they didn't have the experience that I had. So it was more of a, I guess, lack of a better term, maybe a fatherly role to console them and to get them through the night, and to realize that the fight will endure. We will continue, and whether it's me or it's someone else in the future or one of them even. So it was to communicate that that this is a lesson in life and that we got to move on. The disappointment I felt wasn't necessarily for myself as much where I felt for the people that supported the campaign, or the opportunity that we had to really bring change, at least from our district, to the State House. Because we not only did a run a no-nonsense campaign, but we made no-nonsense promises of what we were going to do. And I think it would have really disrupted business as usual. So I think that was a disappointment that we weren't going to get an opportunity to really do that. Of course, you feel a little experience, when you lose and everything else, but I tend to be an optimist and look at the positive sides of things, and immediately engaged in the thought of how do you improve, what do you do that's differently, it's going to give people an opportunity for hope.
On that question, as you look back on it now, what would you change if you were to do that again? What were the things that you would change? What are the things that you see? Somebody comes out of an experience like that, they've got to have that locked in. What would you change?
I think that, I mentioned it earlier, I think that the how we spent our dollars relative to, direct mail was one thing, and we accomplished our goal on that. We had 5 mailers out. But I do think that although we worked very hard to do it, I think before we even started, we had to have a reasonable expectation. We could reasonably, what money we could raise to accomplish what we needed to do, which was, again, in my race, it's a large district, okay? And you need to get your message out to a lot of people. It's
So what would
proven
you-
a
what
lot
would you
more than
change?
the TV advertising.
That's what you, yeah?
Yeah.
How about you, Kathy? What would you look back? Well, what would you do differently?
Well, I'd like to go into the Republican Party and do some reform there. I think we need a little support, more support from the Republican Party.
Okay.
I know that sounds kind of negative, but I think there is room to grow the support for the down-ticket candidates. And I think that's the work that needs to happen, because we as a party have to be stronger. Our Democratic Republic will be stronger if we have people from both sides of the aisle checking each other out, checks and balances, keeping each other honest. And right now it's imbalanced. So we need to strengthen that Republican Party, and now's the time. I mean, we're up against a new state committee chair. The current chair stepped down, so now's the chance to do that. And I think if that strengthens, the Republican Party strengthens, the candidates will do so much better, up and down the ballot, and so I think that's where the energy needs to go.
So let me ask you this question. In general, from your experience only, do you feel that the election process was conducted fairly?
I think there's some room for improvement. I think that voter integrity needs to be looked at. And I'm not sure how big that is, because a lot of voter integrity involves hidden behind the scenes happenings, right? So we don't know. But we need to look at the ballots. We need to look at duplication. We need to look at voter identification. We need to look at the whole process. We need to make sure there's no ballots being stuffed, okay? And I'm not saying that as, oh, that's why I lost. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that we have to work on this as a state to improve future elections, because we want the honest results. And I think that there is room for improvement. There's a room to look at these processes that we have.
How about you, John? Do you feel that your campaign was run fairly? I mean, that the whole election process was run fairly?
I think overall the answer is yes. However, there's proven voter fraud in the state of Massachusetts. There's proven voter fraud that took place in even our elections. Cities of Lawrence, Lowell had voter fraud. There were questions of how votes were counted, even in the congressional race in our area. I think that with proven fraud needs to come some real sophistication. We need to modernize our voting system. For instance, my own precinct at 8 o'clock in the morning, the machine broke down 3 times. That's unacceptable. We can't have those type of things going on in a city, by the way, that was being monitored by the federal government during the election. That stuff can't happen. To me, it's an abomination and a disrespect to the voters that this takes place. So we need serious modernization of our voting system. There's no question about it. Did it affect our race specifically? We can only guess. I mean, I don't think it directly impacted us, but I think overall it impacted the state. Relative to the Mass GOP, I think that Republicans in general, I would say this: we need to, as a party, start acting like a party. Meaning that during the primary process, we can have all the disagreements in the world that we want to have. We can disagree and vote for whoever we want. But once we determine who the candidate is moving forward in the general election, we need to circle around those candidates. And I think that, for the most part, hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened for a lot of years in Massachusetts relative to the Republican Party. The Republican Party has different groups, as the Democrats do. The one thing that's different between the Democrats and the Republicans is that Democrats circle around and work hard for whomever it is wins that nomination.
So let me ask you the final questions here, the both of you. The first, and it's kind of a 2-part question. The first one is, would you ever consider doing this again? And what would you say to somebody who may be watching this show that has an interest in government, maybe an interest in politics, and has crossed their mind to run for office. Could you offer your comments on that?
Yeah, I would encourage anyone that's interested in running for political office to do so. You don't have a real perspective or understanding of how your government operates until I think you get into something like this. It's an experience that everyone, at whether it be a local, state level, even federal level, but run for things that are realistic. Okay, don't run for United States Congress having never run for office before or not having any understanding of what it is. Get involved locally. And I think that's the most important thing is that local politics is what impacts you the most. It has the most impact on your daily life.
So would you do it again?
The answer is possibly. Not anytime soon. But I intend at different levels to be involved to improve our party and to improve people's desire to get involved.
How about you, Kathy?
Okay.
Would you do it again? And what would you say to anybody that's watching that's thinking about this?
Yeah. It's imperative that we have good people step forward to improve and reform our government. So we really need people to step up. And I applaud John for stepping up. I applaud you, Dennis, when you ran for things. And so we need that. It's really what's going to help our state, our country, and our local, obviously. But, you know, whether I'm going to do it or not, I don't know. I mean, I gave it a shot. I put my name out there. I'd like to see other people step up. And that's what we need. But yeah, it's crucial. And, you know, when we talk about, there's a lot of complaints on the news, you know, oh, the corrupt this politician, that politician is corrupt, and they can't believe a word they say. This is true. I can't deny it. What are we going to do about it? We need to get honest people in there. We have to demand that as a people to say we need good, honest people. And we don't want them to be two-faced. Stand for what you believe in, okay? And that's what I want to see for our government all down the line. And I was one of those people, you know. It was tough, though, because it's tough when you play politics. You don't want to upset this group of voters. You don't want to upset that group of voters. It's tough, but I think what we need to do is we need to be as honest and to be as open-minded as possible so that we get to see in a fair, honest way both sides of the story and then come up with the solutions.
Good. Very good. Well, I think you've had a very good, I think the audience has had a very good chance to see two what I would consider great Americans. We are a democratic republic. It requires the citizens to participate in our government. When they do not, our freedom and our government will erode. You've seen people here who are courageous, they're intelligent, they're artful, and they're dedicated. And I think we owe them all respect for getting in and making this system work. Now, as to the issue of winning and losing a campaign, I want you to just remember this one little quip from the former senator, late Senator Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota. He was passing through a airport one time during the 1960 presidential campaign when he was encountered a woman, a supporter, who was very excited to see him and say, oh, and she grabbed him and she hugged him and she said, oh, Mr. Humphrey, it's so happy to see you. You are the thinking man's candidate. And the senator paused, he looked down, and then he smiled and he says, yes, madam, but unfortunately I need a majority to get elected. So on that note, we want to leave you. Thank you very, very much for Ready, Set, Talk, and we'll be waiting for our next episode very soon. Thank you very much.